The city of Viridia did not have a horizon. It had a ceiling. It was a dense, perpetual blanket of cinder-gray particulate matter, filtering out the sun and trapping the world in an eternal, heavy twilight. For 3 centuries, this ash had defined existence, muffling sound, dulling color, and erasing memory. Every breath here was a reminder of something vast and beautiful that had been irrevocably lost. Ilara was one of the many scavengers, a designation given to those tasked with sifting through the skeletal ruins of the above ground, searching for salvageable metals and forgotten power cells. Her uniform was thick, leathered, and stained with the inevitable gray dust that coated everything. The work was numb, tedious, and necessary for the continued operation of the deep subterranean city-states. She lived by the rhythm of the ashfall, a daily chilling cascade that occurred precisely at what should have been noon, signaled by a mournful echoing siren. Ilara often paused during her patrols, not out of fatigue, but curiosity. She would look up at the immovable ceiling and wonder what a true blue sky, a vibrant solar dawn might have felt like. These thoughts were dangerous. The authority, the silent council ruling Viridia, preached the doctrine of contentment, the belief that the past was poisonous and the present darkness was a form of necessary peace. Hope, in Viridia, was not just discouraged. It was considered an infectious cognitive anomaly, quickly stamped out by the gray-robed censors who patrolled the lower levels. Ilara was not hopeful. She was merely curious, a subtle, perhaps more insidious form of rebellion. Her curiosity led her to the deepest, oldest sectors of the scavenger routes. These forgotten sectors were rarely cleared, containing the dangerous, unstable architecture of the pre-ashfall era, places whispered to hold the ghosts of color and warmth. One evening, after the siren had wailed its mournful warning and the daily ashfall began, Ilara found herself far deeper than protocol allowed, within the cracked foundations of what might have been a museum. The air here tasted different, metallic and sharp, not just the usual chalky dust. She passed through a colossal archway, twisted and broken, into a large, hollowed-out chamber. Her lamp, weak and flickering, caught on something suspended above the ground, caught in a net of old, frayed wiring and crystalline debris. It was not a power cell or metal. It was a sphere about the size of a fist, and it emitted the faintest, most unsettling glow she had ever witnessed. It was not firelight nor electric. The glow was a soft, impossible gold, like a drop of solidified sunshine struggling against the overwhelming gray. She immediately recognized the material from forbidden historical hollows. It was called solite, a mineral said to have been crystallized sunlight, used in ancient times to regulate climate. Touching it sent a shock not of electricity, but of pure, profound warmth up her arm. It felt like a memory of summer, a sensation her body had never experienced but instantly recognized. The solite sphere pulsed faintly in her hand, pushing back the immediate dust cloud around her, creating a small, clean bubble of air. This was not salvage. This was a heresy against the doctrine of contentment. It was proof that the censors were lying about the nature of the ashfall. As Ilara held the sphere, a faint but distinct sound cut through the usual silence, a high, whining vibration. The censors' drones were nearby. Fear, cold and immediate, replaced the transient warmth of the solite. If they caught her with this, she would be vaporized and reduced to another layer of ash. She quickly tucked the sphere deep into a hidden pouch in her gear, its golden glow instantly contained, but its heat a scorching secret against her skin. Scrambling out of the forbidden zone, Ilara abandoned her salvage quota. The authority cared about metal. They did not know about light. Back in her tiny, windowless dwelling in the lower sectors, she retrieved the solite. It filled the small room with a golden aura that seemed to sing, a silent, joyful melody. Holding it, she felt a dangerous, terrifying shift within her, not just curiosity, but a profound, undeniable sense of responsibility. The sphere began to whisper, not in words, but in images. Quick, flashing visions of a world green and blue, of trees that reached and thrived under a blazing circle of white light. These were the true memories, the forgotten life that the authority had diligently scrubbed from public records and history books. Ilara now knew that the ashfall was not a natural disaster. It was a deliberate, powerful suppression mechanism designed to keep Viridia's populace docile and controllable. She spent the next 3 days studying the sphere, realizing it was not merely an artifact, but a key, a localized antidote to the permanent twilight. The sphere, she realized, was reacting to her intent, its glow brightening whenever she thought about freedom or clarity. It was calling her to an impossible task. The whispers led her to a tattered ancient scroll hidden within the lining of her own scavenger pack, a relic from her mother who had disappeared years ago. The script detailed the nexus of the veil, the source of the ash and shadow, located at the zenith of the highest spire in the above ground. The nexus was guarded by the Veil Weavers, powerful beings who used specialized resonance towers to keep the sun's light at bay, manufacturing the artificial night. The scroll explained the Solite sphere was a primer, capable of overloading the primary resonance core of the nexus, potentially shattering the veil. The risk was absolute annihilation. If she failed, the energy backlash would not only kill her, but likely vaporize the entire upper portion of Viridia. But the alternative was living another 50 years in the perpetual, controlled grayness, a death by inches. Ilara's decision was made. She needed to reach the spire, a crumbling titan of metal that pierced the underside of the ash ceiling itself, a climb few had ever attempted and none had survived. Her first act was to seek out Kale, a retired engineer and her only true confidant, a man who harbored his own quiet resentment toward the authority. Kale initially refused, his face etched with terror. "It's suicide, Ilara," he whispered, his voice thin as brittle paper. "The sensors watched the spire ceaselessly." Ilara simply placed the glowing solite on his workbench. For the first time in decades, Kale saw a vibrant, true gold, and the sight broke his resolve. "What do you need?" he asked, his voice now firm, his eyes fixed on the impossible light. "I know the schematics of the old defense grid." For the next week, they worked in secret, Kale providing old climbing gear, reinforced lines, and a makeshift cloaking device to confuse the spire's automated optical sensors. The closer she got to the spire, the thicker the ash became, feeling less like dust and more like a heavy living entity, pressing down on her resolve. The night of the climb was marked by an eerie silence. Even the Watcher drones seemed to have paused, perhaps lulled into complacency by the predictable darkness. Ilara started her ascent through the lower supports, scrambling over rusted girders and past huge silent fans that had long since seized up. The world fell away below her, a distant field of flickering, controlled electric light, the only comfort Viridia offered its people. As she gained altitude, the chilling cold intensified, but the solite, held tight in her hand, radiated a counterforce of warmth, a battle of elements she carried internally. The climb became treacherous, vertical scaling on surfaces slick with centuries of accumulated cinder oil. Her muscles screamed in protest. Suddenly, a beam of harsh white light sliced through the darkness, pinning her against the metal. A sensor patrol, alerted by a minor tremor in the old structure. She activated Kale's crude cloaking device. The metal sheath surrounding her gear absorbed the light, momentarily breaking the visual lock. She used the brief window to scramble around a thick supporting column, disappearing into the shadows before the sensors could adjust their targeting grid. The pursuit was immediate, high-pitched mechanical screeches echoing from below as the sensors began their vertical climb, faster and more relentless than she was. Ilara pushed on, driven not by fear of death, but by the vivid memories of the green world the solite had shown her, a world she had never known, but now desperately needed. She reached the first major platform, a vast, circular maintenance deck. The Nexus was only 300 meters above her now. Here, the air itself seemed charged with negativity, a psychic static that tried to convince her the climb was futile, that darkness was eternal. Go back. The peace of gray silence awaits. The thoughts were not hers, but were projected from the powerful resonance core above. She fought back with the solite. She held it up, and the golden light pushed back the psychic assault, clearing her mind of the crushing despair. The sensors arrived on the platform, their metallic footsteps loud on the steel deck. She was trapped between the pursuers and the core. Ilara knew she couldn't fight them. She had to outmaneuver them, drawing them away from the direct path to the spire's summit. She threw a handful of the volatile power cells she had salvaged earlier toward a cluster of old, exposed wires. The resulting short circuit was bright and deafening. The sensors were briefly distracted by the explosion of sparks, allowing Ilara to sprint for the ladder that led to the final ascent, the very tip of the spire. The ladder was almost entirely encased in a pulsing black material, the outer membrane of the Veil Nexus. It was slick, biological, and impossibly cold. As she climbed, the black membrane reacted, forming crude, hardened spikes to block her path, a final, desperate defense mechanism. She scraped her way past, tearing her uniform and skin, fueled by a single, focused thought. A new beginning requires destruction of the old. Finally, she reached the pinnacle, a small, open platform where the resonance core sat, a huge, throbbing black crystal structure embedded with glowing red conduits. The core pulsed with a dark, rhythmic energy, actively sucking the warmth and color out of the upper atmosphere and channeling it into the endless ash fall below. Before she could approach, a final, towering figure detached itself from the core. The Veil Weaver, a sensor unlike any other, ancient and cloaked in liquid shadow. "The anomaly must be extinguished," the Weaver rasped, its voice a dry, echoing whisper that seemed to emanate from the ash itself. "The silence is a mercy. The light is chaos." The Weaver raised a massive, shadow-forged hand, ready to crush the tiny, defiant woman. Ilara ignored the philosophical debate. This was not about light versus dark. It was about control versus choice. She didn't have time to fight. The sensors were already scaling the last ladder, their progress marked by the sound of tearing metal. Ilara lunged, avoiding the Weaver's crushing shadow hand, and raced toward the throbbing heart of the Nexus core. The Veil Weaver shrieked, a sound of pure ancient agony, realizing her intent. It was too late to stop the momentum. Ilara pulled the solite sphere from her pouch. Its light was now blinding, the collected memory of 3 centuries of repressed sunshine. She drove the solite deep into one of the main red conduits, jamming the key into the lock, overloading the mechanism with impossible energy. The moment the solite connected, the Nexus core did not explode. It sang. A wave of pure golden light erupted from the crystal, not violent but overwhelming in its intensity, pushing back the surrounding shadow. The Veil Weaver dissolved instantly, the raw, unfiltered solite energy tearing apart its shadow form. The ascending sensors froze, stunned by the impossible brilliance. Ilara closed her eyes against the brilliance, shielding herself with her arms. The heat was immense, cleansing and utterly life-altering. A deafening, prolonged sound followed, not of metal shattering, but of glass breaking, the metaphysical shattering of the veil itself. When she finally lowered her arms, she saw it. The black cinder ceiling, the suffocating blanket that had covered Viridia for so long, was beginning to tear. Huge, fractured lines of blue, impossible blue, appeared in the ceiling of ash, cracks that widened with breathtaking speed. The ash began to fall, not in the regulated, chilling cascade of the ashfall, but in huge, disorganized chunks, revealing the truth above. Through one of the massive tiers, a beam of genuine sunlight, hot and clean, stabbed down like a spear. It hit the spire platform, bathing Alara in its true fiery glory. It was the first time she had ever been truly warm. The light was harsh, unfiltered, and overwhelming, but it was real. It carried the scent of life, of rain and soil, not just cinder and cold steel. Down below, the lights of Viridia flickered and died as the core's power failed. The city fell into a true, unburdened darkness, but a darkness filled with promise. Alara knew the change would not be immediate. The ash was still thick, the air still heavy, and the authority would attempt to restore their veil. But the veil was broken, the nexus destroyed, and the sun, now visible, would fight back every day. The work of healing and rebuilding had just begun. She looked out over the massive, sprawling city below, no longer a gray prison, but a canvas awaiting the slow, steady return of color. Alara stood alone on the highest point of the shattered spire, feeling the light on her face, the quiet triumph settling deep in her bones. This was not a final victory. It was merely the opening line of a far longer story, the first tentative step of a new civilization. The true meaning of a new dawn was not the sudden explosion of light, but the quiet, profound realization that the choice, the power, was now theirs. The silence was gone, replaced by the natural sounds of wind moving through the massive tiers in the atmosphere, a sound of freedom. Alara took a deep, clean breath, the first one that wasn't contaminated by the old world's fear. The air tasted like possibility. She began the long, difficult descent, carrying the quiet certainty of her new purpose. The gray world was over. The age of controlled twilight had ended, replaced by the uncertain, messy, and infinitely beautiful dawn of human resilience. Alara smiled, a genuine warm expression that hadn't been possible under the veil. The new beginning was here. If you were captivated by Alara's journey from ash to light and want to explore more worlds and characters facing impossible odds, make sure to show your support. Hit the like button, share this powerful story with your fellow fantasy enthusiasts, and most importantly, subscribe to Storycraft Studio for a new dawn of storytelling.